So, welcome to our show tonight. We've got with us John Sage of Accessible Caribbean Vacations, and we're going to talk with him. Before we get started, though, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you can hear this okay, do me a favor and smash the like key. We want to make sure that everybody can hear us okay. And then also, at the end, if you've got some value out of it, we'd really appreciate that you subscribe to it. We've got a bunch of new segments coming up in the month of June. Good morning or good evening, Pam. Oh, and I'm going to answer your question, Pam. The bus from last week, the bus in Ketchikan is fully accessible. So, in case you didn't see that answer, it is fully accessible. So, if you guys are there with a scooter, you'll be good to go. Anyway, so John, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and your company, how you got started, and what you provide?
Sure. So I'm John Sage. About 10 years ago, I started my company, and previous to that, I was doing a lot of really vacation and hobby travel in Europe. And every time I would plan a trip, it would take just hours and hours and hours of planning the trip. And then I would get there, and there would be surprises. And some of the information I found online wasn't accurate, or it was vague, or whatever. And so really just started a company to help people with their accessible European trip planning, and that company is called Sage Traveling. And then that was successful, so we expanded in the Caribbean and started Accessible Caribbean Vacations. And since then, we've continued to grow, still primarily the Caribbean, Europe, and Alaska, but we're looking at some other areas also. But we do land packages. So if somebody wants to go to Rome, Florence, and Venice, and they want the hotels, the accessible van transfers, the trains on the accessible train car with the accessible bathroom, on accessible tours that don't involve any steps, all those types of things. Plus the emergency assistance. We have people in both Europe and the United States that provide true 24/7 emergency support, and those are accessible travel experts. So we do all that for land, but then we also do a lot of shore excursions also. And so those are really kind of our two focus areas that we do.
Okay, and I know about Europe, and I know about the Caribbean. I didn't know about Alaska. So we'll have you back on to talk about Alaska. Today is Caribbean Day.
Okay.
We've given Alaska a lot of attention lately. So let's start with, let's try to kind of stay on the western side of the Caribbean, because if we try to talk about all the islands, we'll be here a week. But so on the typical Western Caribbean itineraries, what are some of the ports that you find easily accessible?
Yeah, so as far as just getting off the dock, so Cancun has 3 different cruise terminals, and getting off the dock and getting through the cruise port generally is not a problem in any of those. The whole island is pretty flat, not much problem there. Grand Cayman is a tender port. It does, it's said to have roll-on, roll-off access. I don't know if that's been the case 100% of the time for everyone that's ever tried it. It was not a problem when I went there, and I haven't heard of a lot of challenges there. In Belize, it was more strict. I was able to roll off to get onto the tender there. No problems, but they were not, they come up with these caveats that say, oh, you must be able to take a step to get onto a ship. And I was traveling with like 6 people. You're like, do I really have to step, or can they just carry me a foot? And so it wasn't a problem there getting on. Jamaica was not, there's 3 ports there, Ochos Rios, Falmouth, and Montego Bay. I've been to Falmouth and I think Ochos Rios, and I don't think I've been to Montego Bay, but getting off are not a big challenge there. Now, Jamaica is very hilly, and so you're going to encounter more hills in Jamaica than you would in Cozumel. Belize is pretty flat, but in Belize, some of the top attractions in both Belize and Progreso and Costa Maya, a lot of the attractions are the Mayan ruins. And so anytime there's a Mayan ruin, they are really, they're not going to lay a bunch of pavement over a bunch of Mayan ruins, is basically the case. Now, I've been to Mayan ruins in all 3 of those places, and the ground, it depends on which Mayan ruin and where the van can park and where exactly, what route you're taking and everything. But I've been able to manage it in my wheelchair. That's not to say that I would recommend it for all travelers with mobility issues. So those are just a few little nuggets off the top of my head. Am I missing any Western Med ports? Honduras, Roatan, yeah. So Roatan has 2 cruise ports. I don't think there's any issues there. I don't think they do much or any tendering that I'm aware of. It also does have some hills that I remember encountering. Yeah. And it's also lesser developed. I know that when we were designing shore excursions there, just finding anywhere on the island with an accessible bathroom was a challenge. So we had to work on that, and ultimately they built one for us. So we made some progress there.
Well, yeah, and we did, and we'll talk about some. We've been to several of those ports. We did a tour in Roatan. We did a private tour, and like I said, my wife's wheelchair collapses, so he just had his card. But the one thing we didn't need on the tour was the bathroom, because I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if we'd have passed one, if there would have been, what you do. That's one of the things that as I told you I was going to work on the Alaska port guides. That's been one of the questions everybody wants is where are the accessible bathrooms, because that's pretty important if you're stuck in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
So let's go back to, we went to not Aruba. We went to Grand Cayman, Georgetown, in March on MSC on their ammonia. And that one we were able to do roll on, roll off on theirs. But I was watching the tenders for, I think it was Carnival was next to us, and their tenders did not appear to be roll on, roll off. And I don't know exactly why, but like I said, there seemed to be 2 different tender companies, and their ports, their dock was set up a little differently, and the one was very easy to roll on, roll off, the other wasn't. I did think that in general that Georgetown was pretty accessible, but just because it was all, it's flat. There's not really any hills. We went out and went around pretty much all the shopping areas and some of the back areas, and we went down south. Actually, you went out of the dock, you went right. I don't know what direction that really is. It felt like south, but I'm not sure it was. And we went till we ran out of touristy stuff. And all of that was, like I said, was easily accessible. We didn't run into a problem with like cutouts not being there, where we had to manually lift the chair up. So I thought that was pretty good.
And I will say, Georgetown accessibility, sidewalk ramps and things like that is very good. Accessible bathrooms, or you're going to find more of those. Typically, when you can kind of, the pattern that I've seen is if an island or a port is British heritage or Dutch heritage or something like that, or St. Thomas is U.S. Virgin Islands, the accessibility is going to be better. If it's a heritage from some other country that maybe doesn't have as much accessibility laws that they sort of pass along, it's not as good. And that's one of the nice things about Alaska. There are more accessible vans, there are more accessible bathrooms and things like that. Some of the smaller Caribbean islands, there's just no federal or national laws surrounding accessibility. So they do, they have the best of intent, but if the contractor hasn't been told exactly how steep to make a ramp or how wide to make a bathroom door or to leave a space next to the toilet, if they haven't been told to do that and required to do that, they often forget, and then they just don't do it. So the bathrooms are a key component of any sort of onshore experience.
Yeah. Costa Maya, and we haven't done any of the excursions there. Well, I tell you about it. The one thing we did there, we've been to Costa Maya like 3 times, and I will say that Costa Maya, the port area itself, is probably my favorite port area because there's a lot to do right there. You've got not all of it's accessible, but you've got the bird walk thing that's like in the sky where they have I forget what it's they have a name for it, but anyway, they have a bunch of different little huts that are connected with the wooden bridge. Now, my wife, she can walk a little bit. She wouldn't get on it even if she could walk really well, because she doesn't like that kind of thing. But that was pretty cool. They have a couple of shows, and they've got a lot of shopping there. But what we did that was kind of cool was we rented a golf cart in Costa Maya, and I typically do excursions on my own, and so we just took it in the hall. Okay, yeah, we'll come right back to that here in a minute, Pam. And that was kind of interesting because they had, the golf cart company. It was real easy to put the wheelchair in the back. She just scooted into the cart. And then they had places we could park, and with restaurants like Crazy Lobster was one of them, where you could get down and get there's like pavement right next to the beach area, and then she was able to get from there over with her without her chair, and that was kind of interesting. But I tend to be a thrifty person too. Okay, so. Let's talk about what about private islands in that area?
Yeah, I haven't done as many accessibility inspections of the private islands, but just hearing through word of mouth, even the private islands, which can be pretty much controlled by the cruise lines, there are still accessibility challenges. Where I know that there was, one wheelchair accessible cabana, but there was sort of like sand to reach it, and so
we'll come back to that in a second.
Yeah. So the private islands. I mean, they're working. The thing is, that cruise lines, as much as they want to, it's like some of the other as much as they want to make things accessible, it's not really their area of expertise, and there's not federal guidelines about how to make a private island wheelchair accessible or accessible for any type of disability, and so. They do the best they can, but I don't know. I'm not aware of an island that I've heard where the whole island is fully accessible. I would think that if that had been accomplished, that somebody would be harping about that and really bragging about that. I don't think I've heard that anywhere.
Well, I will say that NCL has done a good job on Harvest King. They have the beach wheelchairs. The 95% of the islands you can reach off of either boardwalk or concrete, except until you get off like toward the beach and in areas that are full of sand. But you're talking about the ramp and the sand between the ramp and they had one of the bars. I was looking at this because they had a wheelchair ramp up into the bar, but you had to cross about 6 foot of sand to get to the ramp. I'm like, okay, how does that work? But yeah. I will say that Harvest Key had probably the easiest for bathrooms and those kinds of things. They were all fully accessible. They had a fully accessible restaurant. They had lifts for the pool so that you could get down. The one thing that was kind of interesting because we were there on I guess we were on the Pearl in January, and there was a family that had a child that needed a wheelchair full time. And so we found the beach wheelchair, and we were traveling out, and they had like 6 or 7 of them. And so they got a beach wheelchair, and they were headed down, and they had the same thing happen to them that happened to us. Is as soon as you get close to the water, they start yelling, "Can't go in the water." I'm like, well, what good's a beach wheelchair if you can't get in the water? Yeah. But I think what it was, and I think their concern is these particular beach wheelchairs have these really big balloon tires. And I'm not sure that they wouldn't provide so much buoyancy that it might not be safe in the water. I don't think it was necessarily they were worried about damage. But, I mean, you've got, they're probably 8 inches around and, and 6 inches across. And so that would add quite a bit of buoyancy. And if they don't, so I think that may have been why. But you can at least get down on the beach, get close. We do have Pam asked, she said, what and where are the best beaches? And I'm assuming she's talking about for accessibility because she says sand is a killer. And she said Harvest Key was the best she'd found. But of the beaches that you've been to and seen, what have you seen for being the best?
Yeah, I'll start with sort of like what makes a accessible beach. So what you actually find more of on European beaches, what's more common is they will have a boardwalk, or it will be some type of either permanent or sort of, it will be a long mat that rolls out through the sand, and that's pretty common. I've seen that in Barcelona and Mykonos and Nice and a bunch of other places where they will have a fairly firm pathway that you can roll on top of. I've also seen in some of those places they will have lifeguards on duty. There was a free beach wheelchair in Palma de Majorca that I was able to transfer into, and it was sort of the lifeguard's job to sort of assist and help, and so that was great. Now, of course, the waves were a little rough, and so I was kind of getting tossed around. Wasn't the greatest experience. I haven't seen a whole lot of those paths in Caribbean islands. There's probably some that I've seen somewhere, but more likely is the beach wheelchairs. So about beach wheelchairs, one thing is there's a bunch of different models. They're not all the same. Some of them I've seen are very low. They're difficult for me to transfer down into. And then I've seen some that have big wheels so that they will actually float in the water. I'm trying to think if I've ever seen one that I can push myself. I almost always have to have, at least the ones that I've experienced, I have to have somebody push me, which is not my preferred thing. And so, and a lot of times, a lot of these beach wheelchairs they've bought years ago, they haven't really been maintained. So like one wheel won't roll, and things like that. And so it's a challenge. And I think as more people with disabilities cruise, and as these issues get raised, there's going to be more beach wheelchairs available. We're certainly working with a lot of the cruise lines trying to get more accessible beach excursions. If those are something that you really want, talk to the cruise lines. Tell them you want them, and they, we can do that for them. I mean, that's what we do, is provide shore excursions. Another thing about the beach wheelchairs, there are some beaches that will have beach wheelchairs, or there's beach clubs, but often it is first come, first serve. So, you've been planning this trip for 6 months, and you want to know that there's a wheelchair reserved there for you, really. And so a lot of places don't allow that, unfortunately. And so that's something that we're also sort of working on is, okay, how can we combine a beach wheelchair with an accessible vehicle, package that together, bring people to a beach that has an accessible bathroom and enough shade and all these types of things. But to be more specific about which beaches are the most accessible, I know Chonkanab Beach Club in Cozumel has a beach wheelchair. There is a beach in St. Thomas, and the name escapes me, but there's a beach wheelchair somewhere in St. Thomas. And I would have to think about other ones. I'm not certain of the names of beaches, but there are places that have some beach wheelchairs.
Yeah, it was interesting when we were in Jamaica, because we went to Ocho Rios, and I said that the cruise port is accessible. We did. We actually floated the Martha Bray because my wife could get down. There's probably 4 or 5 steps to get down there, and so she was able to navigate that. Her problem was getting off of the raft at the other end, because she's got 2 artificial hips, artificial knee, and a bad back, and so trying to figure out exactly how to get back to a standing position, so she could try to get off was a little bit of a challenge. But when I was doing my research for Ocho Rios, there was an excursion that MSC listed that included beach access. So apparently, somewhere near Ocho Rios, there is a beach where you can get down at least pretty close to the water in a wheelchair. Now, so we didn't try it. We did a private tour there, but
yeah, and I've seen my experience, working with the cruise lines. So the shore excursions that we do, and we also provide accessible shore excursions directly to the cruise lines. But we say there's 5 components to make a shore excursion accessible. It's the accessible vehicle, And everybody thinks of that. They need a vehicle with a wheelchair lift or a wheelchair ramp. That's most people that don't use wheelchairs. That's all they think about is, oh, all I need to do is change the vehicle and it's accessible.
Yeah.
That's just the first step. And then you need accessible attractions, the accessible bathrooms. And then if there's some type of route that you're using, whether it's through a city or a market or whatever, that needs to be step free. So it needs to not have any curves along the way. And then we also say we want the tour guides to be familiar with people with disabilities. So if there's construction and all of a sudden the tour route has to change, they're not looking for an accessible bathroom or a sidewalk ramp for the first time. They've done this sort of song and dance before. They know that you don't just grab somebody's wheelchair and start pushing them without asking them. That they know sort of in some countries and some cultures, certain terminology is really offensive. That is very common in other countries. And so those are sort of the 5 components that we try to recommend.
Okay, we've got a question. We got Jim Daniel here, and he said something not Caribbean. So the question would be, what about? And I guess we'll just touch on it in a minute. Let me go back to Jim. Jim, were you asking about Alaska in particular, or did you have another port in mind? Because he's talking about rental mobility scooters. So we'll come back to you in a minute with that, Jim. So let's talk about obstacles on the ship. In general, I find that most of them, and it's kind of funny because I was on MSC on the Harmonia, and that was probably the least friendly. And I mean, it wasn't bad, but they had, the thing that sticks in my mind, they had a ladies' accessible bathroom up on the pool deck. And the door had a pretty strong hinge on it. And then it had about a 2-inch lip to get over. And I'm like, okay, I wouldn't really classify that as accessible. I mean, you could get a wheelchair in it, but and this one lady was able to get her wheelchair up, and then somebody had to hold the door for her. Whereas I've been on, NCL's probably the line I sail on most, and almost all of their bathrooms now have you slap a switch and the door opens. You go in and it shuts behind you, automatically, and it's got ramps. And in fact, we were on the Sky. We were on the Sky in January. I did a couple of back-to-back cruises. And I found one door. I had one of the meet and greets. I met the chief engineer, and and we was talking about accessibility. And I told him I found a door that was kind of hard to get out. It had a ramp, but again, it had a really strong spring, and there was no way to latch it open. So one person by themselves in a wheelchair, I don't think could get out. It was just the fairly steep ramp. Really strong spring. You had to pull it in, and I'm like, okay, I don't see any way to get up and out without the door hitting it. But it was kind of funny because he said, well, what we'll do is if you need to go out that door, call me and I'll open the door for you. Give me 10 minutes and I'll be there to open the door. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, and just a little more on that story, because NCL made all of, I won't say all of them, but had people from all their departments that were able-bodied people spend a week in a wheelchair, a week using a walker, and a week using a scooter on the ships. And their job was to look for things that were hard.
Yeah.
So that as they went through the refurb process, that they could start to fix that. Anyway, I asked you a question, then I started talking. I'm sorry.
That's right. Yeah, just regarding accessibility on the ships.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a couple of just sort of generalizations. So one is that the newer the ship, the more accessible it is. Basically, accessibility has improved over time. The shipbuilders have gotten better at it. And a lot of the shipbuilders build ships for a lot of different cruise lines. So the shipbuilders have gotten better at it just with the way they've designed things and everything. I can also say, so let's start with the cabins. So that's what most people focus on is the cabin accessible? For the most part, cabins are more accessible than a lot of hotel rooms I've been to. is what I'll say. And so now that's not to say they're perfect, and certainly not perfect for everybody, but they do. All the new ones, I think, have roll-in showers. I mean, I've seen some with bathtubs, but those are older ships. I think almost all the new ones have roll-in showers, and they will have a bench that folds down from the wall. One thing, sometimes I've seen it where it folds down from the wall, but the grab bar is located behind that, so it's in the middle of your back right here, and so that's just sort of a poor design. That's something that happens on some ships. But I've seen ships actually remove that later on, that they realize that, they get the feedback and they remove it. The accessible sink, sometimes they'll have enough room for me to roll my knees underneath, but the accessible sinks often have less counter space than a normal cabin. There's almost always a grab bar next to the toilet. In some ships, there's a grab bar on the other side also that folds down from the wall.
Yeah.
So you have it on both sides. And the other big thing to look for, the other big thing is basically the door to the balcony. Is what type of door is that? Is it a swing out door? Is it a sliding door? Is there a ramp to get onto it? Because I'm fairly strong and pretty good with opening doors and everything. But if I'm on a ramp and I have to slide a door at the same time, that doesn't work so well.
Yeah.
And is the ramp, is it real gradual, or is it something that was added as an after, after the ship was built, it was added, and it's pretty steep. And so getting out to the balcony is something that can have some challenges. And then there was one ship I was on where the closet, to get into the closet, I actually needed to be on that ramp. And so that was really awkward too. That was sort of a poor design. The cabins are generally pretty good. I mean, if you want to just compare them to hotel rooms, they're generally pretty good. Where I find the biggest differences between ships is one of the places is the pool. And the thing that I usually look for, that I prefer is, look, I want to have a disabled lift into at least one pool and at least one hot tub. And ideally, if there's an indoor pool, I want a lift into the outdoor pool and the indoor pool. And some ships, maybe they'll have a lift into a hot tub, but not the pool, or vice versa. So that's something I look at. Are the disabled lifts present? Another area that I look at is the theater. So where are the accessible seats? Are they only the last row, or is there somewhere else that there's an accessible spot for a wheelchair? And if they are, and they're almost always the last row. Sometimes they'll have some where they'll lead you down the hall and you can get front row and things like that. But if you are in the last row, are those seats movable? If there's a group of like 5 wheelchair users, can they sit together, or is it 2 wheelchair spots, then 2 fixed seats, then 2 wheelchair spots? You've seen that in like stadiums and things like that. It's real common. So, but some places they have movable seats, and so you can do whatever configuration you want. So that's something I look for. In the restaurants, just making sure there's enough room to get to your table. On some ships they're packed in pretty tight, and so you have to ask a bunch of people to move out of the way just to get to your table. And then probably the last thing I think of is the automatic doors. So is it manual doors, particularly on the pool deck? Is it manual doors? Is it motion activated doors? Is it buttons? Whatever, And the funny thing is, and this is true onshore as well, is that these accessibility improvements like motion activated doors, everybody benefits from those. Those are not just for people with disabilities. And so, and in newer ships, they generally do have those. They have motion activated doors, and everybody enjoys it. If they're carrying their plate from the buffet or whatever, everybody enjoys it. So those are some of the areas where you can see some accessibility differences. And the other thing that I'll tell, because I hear this from a lot of the cruise line employees that I speak with, and they're all concerned about accessibility on their ship. I say, look, that's all great, but the ships are more accessible than any port you're going to. So you can worry about that, but add accessible shore excursions. That's where people are going to run into the biggest challenges of their vacation. And so they're doing that. They're adding those, and they're making more of a focus. But onshore, it's the cobblestones and the sand and the hills and the bathrooms and all these types of things that are present in these places.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I just redid a video we shot in New Orleans, and New Orleans downtown is not my favorite place for a wheelchair.
Yeah.
First of all, you got sidewalks that are like this, and so when I'm pushing my wife, I'm kind of like pushing up, at a 45-degree angle, trying to hold my position on it. And then the cobblestones aren't bad, and they're maybe not even really cobblestones in a lot of places, just pavers. They're not bad unless they're just missing, and then you have a wheelchair and there's one missing, and you don't not paying attention and you hit that. Now it's very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And then we went to an area called French Market, which is like next to the French Quarter, but and I'm going along, and by the Museum of Jazz, we go to cross this driveway, and it's these pavers that are like a foot square, not smooth, not anywhere near the same level, and I think a couple of fillings fell out of my wife as we went across. So yeah, it makes a huge difference. In fact, it's interesting because we backed out of. I had booked a Baltic Capitals cruise, 10 days, and I started looking at the places that we needed to go and what it was going to be like. And St. Petersburg, a great example of not so handicapped friendly. Everything's got steps, and everybody said that the people there are not very helpful. But Tallinn and a lot of these places, you got cobblestones, you've got hills, and a manual wheelchair is not going to be much fun. That's the advantage of a scooter, because you get a little bigger tire there. Let's go back to Jim's question. He was interested in Alaska, and since you do have some expertise, his question was. So Alaska cruises and accessibility. You want to talk about it?
Yeah. I think he was asking, was it rental mobility scooters? I think that's what he was.
Oh, yeah. You read the whole question. I didn't.
Yeah. So
I would say that rental scooters, either mobility at sea, is it? And what's the other one?
It's special needs at sea and Scoot Around.
Okay.
Two companies, and most cruise lines, you can, I believe, maybe all cruise lines, you can choose either of the companies. I know the people at Special Needs at Sea quite well, and they do a great job. They're located near Fort Lauderdale, and so those are the ones that I'm most familiar with.
Yeah, it's kind of one in your cabin. The other one, you actually get it before you start to board, and I'm like, that seems like the easier choice, because then somebody didn't have to push you up the ramp. Mm-hmm. There's some advantage to that. But yeah. Okay, thank you for reading his question fully. I just got about halfway through and stopped reading. But I will say this, Jim, that I don't know which port you're going to, but I will say that our experience is Juneau is really good. And you can get almost all the way out to, what's the falls there at Mendenhall? The name slipped my brain. But anyway, there's a waterfall right there by Mendenhall. And you can get almost all the way in a wheelchair, all the way out to the waterfall itself. You run into a gravel beach. On a scooter, you might be able to get all the way out. My wife turned around and went back. But that's all that area was very accessible. The area downtown is nice and easy. Let's see. Ketchikan is, I thought, pretty easy, except it gets pretty hilly if you get very far from the port. But the buses there, Pam asked the question last week. The buses in Ketchikan are very easy for accessibility. Skagway, do you know Skagway? Because every time we go to Skagway, we rent a car and drive into Emerald Lake, and that's just such an amazing trip, Emerald Lake.
Yeah.
Desert.
Yeah, we did the same. Well, we actually did both. So we rode the railroad, the railway, and we also, because I wanted to test out both ways. So we did the railway and rented a car and drove up into the Yukon, and yeah, just a beautiful area, very small town. And like a lot of the Alaskan ports, people work half the year and and don't work the other half of the year. So I feel for the people up there with the coronavirus. They're losing a year's worth of salary basically. So I feel for the people up there.
Yeah. Basic straight point. I thought the accessibility was pretty good. They had, they have a scooter if your wheelchair folds up. I mean, like not a scooter, but like electric carts to move you from the port area up to the area. The trails in general, I thought were pretty good. We went to Huna, but my wife wasn't with us, so we didn't really explore Huna. We just went and got I took my granddaughter halibut fishing, so we went there. Seward is amazing. If you're going as far as Seward I thought was an amazing town for accessibility. The Sea Life Center there is amazing. The folks at Major Marine, we did a tour, and they took care of making sure my wife got on the ship with her manual wheelchair from the top of the area by the dock. They took her all the way down and got her on the ship. They didn't want me helping. They had two of them, and they made sure that everything went really smoothly. Their ship that we were on was really comfortable, easily accessible. Even the bathroom worked okay for her. They had, they reserved her a spot where she had really good viewing since she was in a wheelchair. So I thought Seward we were really pleased. Have you done the Alaskan train, John, from Anchorage to Seward?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and that's pretty amazing, and it's fully accessible, even the old car service. It's in Seward they had the hand crank elevator, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I thought that was very accessible as well. Okay, and I appreciate that information, Jim. So let's see. Let's go back to the Caribbean. We missed any of the ports in Western Caribbean. We did Jamaica. We did. We talked a little bit about Progreso, and my understanding is there is nothing. I was supposed to go to Progreso in April, and that got canceled. But there is nothing in Progreso really. So, you do. What did you do? What did you guys do there?
Yeah, so we actually were there last year, and we developed an accessible shore excursion. So we go to the. I'm not going to try the pronunciation of the Mayan ruins there, but we bring people to Mayan ruins, and we park real close. It's the one, and I can't remember what the name was, but we bring the vehicle as close as possible to the Mayan ruins, and it is a little bit uneven to get through there, but it's flat. It's just a little bit uneven. It's not hilly or anything. And then you can actually go into the Mayan ruins, and there's temples on both ends and other things. So that's something that we're doing, and we just heard that Royal Caribbean is adding that, so that'll be available on once Royal Caribbean starts back up. Royal Caribbean and Celebrity, they'll be offering that accessible shore excursion.
Okay, very good. In fact, I went through their training, and then I had a conversation. In fact, I'm working to get them on to do a discussion of all their accessible programs, because they have some really nice programs, and not just mobility wise, but full spectrum of disabilities. They do a lot of things. Here's an interesting thing. You may know this, but in Merida, I forget. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. There's actually a C note in the parking lot of the Costco in town.
Okay.
So you want to take them to a C note? You take them to Costco, and there's a C note right there. And in fact, my understanding is it actually runs under part of the Costco building itself.
Interesting.
The only reason I knew that was I had arranged a private tour because I was going to go do that, and again, I wanted something my wife could get up and be able to see, and so my guy was like, "Hey, I know where there's a keynote in town. So we can go there." And do you do Merida at all? Because I understand there's quite a few interesting museums and things there.
I don't think we do at least. The tour that Royal Caribbean picked up is not sightseeing. It's Mayan ruins. It's a visit to the coast to see where the crater was that killed the dinosaurs from there. And then I I think we may have also added a stop at a accessible restaurant that overlooks the water. I can't remember what the final itinerary was, but I don't think there's much sightseeing in town that we included.
Okay. Well, yeah, Progresso, but this actually, Meredith is, I want to say, maybe half an hour away or something, and that is because this guy it's an old colonial town, and there's some museums and stuff he was telling me about. Okay, well, I think we've covered pretty much all of the Western Caribbean. I appreciate everybody that's here and watching. If you're watching on the replay, do me a favor. If you have questions, put them in the comments down below. And in fact, if you're watching on the replay, do me a favor and in the comments, let me know where you're watching from. And we'll try to get answers for everybody. Like I said, I appreciate everybody that was here live. Next week, actually, Jim Daniel is going to be on. We're going to talk about Seattle as a port of departure and about things to see and do in Seattle the day before. And for any of you that have never read any or listened to me postulate on things, the one thing I will tell people is you always fly in the day before. Do not fly and travel on cruise day, because anything that goes wrong, you're going to be standing on the dock waving at your ship saying, man, I wish I was there. If you'll stick around for just a minute, John, we'll say goodbye to all these folks. Again, I appreciate everybody. Thanks for being here. And we'll see you guys next time.